for joining in and staying with us. This is Mame, and this is Independent Voice. Thank you so much, Graham, again, for your time to put articles out as this one. It is very thought-provoking. At least it did for me. I thought about different things, and therefore the reason why I wanted to do this. And now in just having to talk to you, we have a chance now to look into the depth of your thinking in putting this piece together. You're saying, as a society, we have to come to that solid line where we're saying, okay, it's time to either stop or kind of track back and evaluate.
I wanted to also bring into the conversation the idea of happiness, because that seems to be a large part of it. You know, we have been conditioned into believing that happiness is to be found externally, in things, in stimulation, in, you know, stuff, in, you know, some kind of activity, in doing something. And actually we see that actually, if that's where you're looking for happiness, if you're looking in the world for happiness, in the world of things and stimulation and sensory pleasure and so on, all that you will find is momentary alleviations from misery. Mm-hmm. You don't find happiness. You find, you know, just a moment where you don't feel quite so awful.
Right.
Yeah. And it's not, you know, and even if you do, even if there is a sense of happiness, it's actually, all that you're doing is you're quietening the perpetual state of desire for a moment, which allows you to experience that state of happiness, which is always present. We just don't know it because our focus is constantly external.
Yes.
You know, the next shopping trip, the next holiday, the next dinner, the next, you know, whatever it might be. And it's so, and we're hooked. You know, humanity is hooked on this cycle of misery, consumerism, short-term pleasure, misery, consumerism, short-term pleasure.
And misery sells. Right now, misery sells big time.
Yeah, so you're unhappy, sign up to a subscription with Netflix. You're unhappy, go out and have dinner with your friends and drink 2 or 3 beers, or, you know, whatever it might be. You're unhappy, go shopping. You know, for God's sake, go shopping, you know, because if you don't, the economy is going to collapse. You cannot continue the way we're living and either face the environmental emergency and do something about the vandalism that we've inflicted on the planet, or create societies in which people start to feel more and more content with less and less. You can't do both. You know, we're going to have to wake up to the idea that economies are there. What's the purpose of the economy? It should be there to create the facilities and the structures and the things that we need in order for human beings to grow and A, fulfill their potential, and B, more importantly, I think, find out who and what they actually are. We know what we've become and we know what we do, but we don't know who and what we are. And all these things are connected. So I think, you know, the myth of happiness being dependent on external stimulation, it's one of those, you know, it's fake news and it's sold to us in order to maintain this consumerist society.
Right. Right. I think we have evolved from consumerism of just goods and materials to consumers of information, consumers of, oh, the sky is falling, consumers of atrocity, consumers of bad news, consumers of anything. For example, I mean, social media, journalism, or anything like that. What sells is a nightmare. What sells is atrocity. What sells is negativity. And who wants to talk about the positive? Who wants to talk about being human? Who wants to talk about the fundamental change that we needed to do? And you put it in I think in the most strongest terms, saying come back to the basics, not taking down what is good and what we've accomplished because we've developed certain things. But I think what we're talking about is coming back to or looking into the fundamentals, the term you used, contentment. If we continue the way we're going at, something is going to snap somewhere. And you had mentioned the robbing of the environment is going to cause us to pay for it some other way. And to me, I think everybody is kind of slowly getting there. I think a whole lot of people may not necessarily put it in the way that we're putting it today, but I think this conversation is happening because this isn't the first time I'm hearing this. This conversation is happening with people in Africa. I've had conversation with people literally sitting there and saying, we need to come back to the fundamentals of happiness, which starts from within. The fundamentals of understanding spirituality. I mean, spirituality has been given so many different meanings, which I don't want to take too much time going into it because it's in your article and people can read that and see clearly stated what we consider spirituality is not what we consider spirituality many, many moons ago. And to me, I don't always have to focus on what is being sold to me, which is atrocity, which is negativity, which is the world's ending, which is, you know, all the bad things. And we've become consumers of almost anything. And another thing that you had mentioned, I thought was really amazing way of putting it, is that the world has become the marketplace. My life, my household, because I have technology in my little hand all day long in 24 hours, it has become a place where anything and everything is sold to me, as long as I'm willing to entertain it, as long as I am willing to consume it.
I'm sure there's a place for the market, but I'm not quite sure where that place is, but I'm sure there is. You know, I'm not an economist, but certainly, you know, healthcare, education,
Right.
utilities, transportation, you know, these things the market has no place in these areas. It's, you know, I mean, in Britain, at least we have, you know, decent public education system and a healthcare system, which is on its knees, but nevertheless free at the point of use. And, you know, and that's the case in many European countries and Scandinavian countries. That's not, I know, the case in the US, for example. And a lot of these ideas that have come from an extreme understanding of a capitalistic ideology, which has flowed from the US. And then it was intensified under Reagan and Thatcher in the late 70s, early 80s. And we're seeing the consequences of it now. So everything is seen as a commodity. And the idea of development, yeah, you know, we may have developed, you know, certainly in terms of medical science and technology, yeah, there's certain developments. But in consciousness,
Oh, wow.
You know, we seem to be just as brutal and barbaric as we ever were. I mean, there's lots of highlights. You know, we have a Beethoven and a Plato and Shakespeare and so on. But, you know, generally speaking, it's that needs to change. To go back to the beginning of our conversation, it's that consciousness that needs to change. You cannot continue to build the artifice of change without the individual changing.
Thank you.
It's us that need to change.
Yes.
You know, individually, we have a responsibility to the society we live in and the environment that we're part of. And if we all accept that, if we say, okay, I'm going to change, I'm going to do, you know, I'm not going to be selfish, or I'm going to be aware of my selfishness, at least. And when that monster rises up, then I'll at least have a choice whether I'm going to respond to it or not respond to it. And gradually, if you do that, then, and you say, okay, I'm going to sacrifice some of my time for a community project, or I'm going to work with my neighbors, or I'm going to work, you know, in whatever way. Then slowly that impulse for self-preservation will start to fade.
Right.
You know, and so if you do that, and the neighbor does that, and your husband does that, and your daughters do that, and your sons, then you start to change the community in which you're living, and that has a ripple, and so on and so on and so on.
So it comes to a choice. It's a choice.
Absolutely. But then, Mammy, it gets to a point, Because yes, I mean, you're right, it seems to be about a choice, but the more that you respond to, I mean, in the article, I called spirituality that center of goodness which exists within us all.
Exactly.
So the more you respond to that, then you find that after a while and quite quickly, there is no choice. Yes. Then you simply act. You know, you don't have to think what's the right thing to do. You just do it because that's what you automatically do.
Right.
And so you change your conditioning. And you free yourself from your conditioning, actually. It's not a question of reconditioning yourself. It's a question of freeing yourself from this conditioning into we've been conditioned into competition and selfishness.
Yes.
And humanity is not inherently selfish, and we are not inherently competitive. You know, people say, oh, it all goes back to this, you know, this primeval man who, you know, killed one another. Actually, it's nonsense. If you look into it, humanity would have died off many, many times if we hadn't cooperated. The only way that humanity survived, you know, the dinosaurs and various other predatory animals, you know, humanity was almost killed off a number of times, was because groups cooperated. They worked together, they shared the technology of the time. And that's what we should be doing now. The biggest single thing we can do to change things is learn to share. When I was in Addis, there was, you know, all sorts of problems. And I thought, okay, well, if there were two projects that we set up, I was living in Firenze. People everywhere. I mean, it's incredibly densely populated parts of the city, loads of young people. And, you know, Ethiopia is young. So I think the median age is 17 or 18 or something. So there's teenagers everywhere. So this is an example. But you'd see these young people standing around all day, not doing anything. They weren't in education. They couldn't find work. So they just hung out. But down the road from where they were standing doing nothing, there would be an elderly woman who didn't have the strength to go to collect water and was relying on family who perhaps could come, couldn't come. So the young boys on the corner would never even think about helping her. So if you go up to them, you know, and I did this if you go up to these groups and say, look, you know, there's a lady there who she can't collect water, she can't carry it. Would you mind helping? Yeah, I'd love to help. They'd immediately do it. It's not that people are cruel, they're thoughtless. But so if you start to create a space in which social responsibility is inherent in that space, in that community, in that school, in that family, in that cabaret, if it's Ethiopia, or district, if it's America, whatever it is, then people will automatically do it. They do it in times of crisis, you know, then they'll help people, but we need it all the time. And then you start to change the atmosphere of the space in which people are living. And that expression of cooperation and kindness starts to expand and expand and expand.
Right. So it starts from the self, it starts from me. We always talk about the system change and the socioeconomic and all that other stuff changing. But what we're saying is that system begins with me. That system is me. You gave an example that is very close to my heart, which is we have a whole lot of people capable, young generation, who is complaining about not having anything to do at all. We're trying to help these destitute elders who cannot do much for themselves, but I can't hire a single individual to even pay a salary to do the work, because what they have become programmed to is the quick and easy fix. What's in it for me? And I don't mean not even just the salary. there's other things that people expect. And I think that's the mindset shift. We need to have this paradigm shift altogether. I think it's the mindset that needs to change. And I'm so glad that this conversation is happening in so many different ways, because I've had it elsewhere, completely different form. But what we're saying is going back to the basics and having this mindset shift to know that that responsibility lies within me first. I'm going to go ahead and read you one more quotation, and then we can wrap this one. In a materialistically oriented, cynical world, I mean, talk about changing the mindset. You know, the very first thing that comes to mind anymore when we hear things or see things is not necessarily the positive, or not necessarily what can I do. The thing that comes to mind a lot of times, and I talk to a lot of people, is why didn't somebody do this? Why didn't the government did that? Why didn't it's always somebody's responsibility that failed at it, but it was never what was my contribution. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's very true, isn't it? I think, I mean, a couple of things I wanted to say and to add is that when you were talking about people doing things and wanting something from it, that you know, children are educated, and most children are parented very poorly, and one of the main methodologies that's employed is reward and punishment. Mm-hmm. So it's, you know, if you do well in the class, you get a gold star. If you don't do well in the class, you don't get a gold star. So we, from a very, very early age, people's actions are poisoned. So reward and punishment. Mm-hmm. It's so the actions of the child, which become the actions of the adult, are corrupted from the offset. Mm-hmm. And they're not honest. The actions are not honest. Even if the child does something that they're doing it for the wrong reasons. Most of the time, the child is doing it because they want the parent to approve of what they're doing. They want to succeed in school, not because of, majority of the time, not because of their own enjoyment of the subject, but because they want to be seen to be doing well, and they want to please their parents because they want to be loved, and you know, they want to be valued and so on. So the children are corrupted by the education system and by most types of parenting, because parents on the whole don't understand the psychological impact of the way they're parenting their children. Mm-hmm. We are all full of good intentions, and we all make a complete mess of it. So we all make enormous mistakes, and you know, some of these ideas are at the heart of why that happens. So you have a classroom of children who are acting from a position which has been corrupted. That is a school of young people who are more or less acting in the same way. And because there's such pressure to conform to a particular pattern and a particular ideal, that adds to that image that the children have of themselves. Those children leave the school, go to the university, and go into the workplace. They form the society. So it starts from, you know, from the child. So we have to completely reevaluate the way we educate children. We have to if there is such a thing as the spiritual, and if I think most people would agree, even if they don't believe in, you know, a God or a soul or the self or any of these things, would agree that there is some inherently good quality within every human being. So if we are to create a society in which that flows freely, and which is that determines the nature of the society in which we're living, mm-hmm. then we need to allow it to manifest from the beginning. We need to stop inhibiting it. Yes. And we inhibit it through competition, through conformity, through reward and punishment, through ignorance, really. Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of the time, parents and teachers, they don't mean to do any harm. Right. but they do harm.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they do. You see it all the time. It's to do with lack of understanding. So we need to understand these things better.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I think it becoming more aware what the root cause is and being intentional about it, I think, is where we're getting at. We have confirmed and continue to confirm to these external things that we believed and held on to for the longest time. And I think we're at that crossroad or that breaking point where we're saying we either do something about it or continue to spin out of control, and it's going to self-destruct. That's where we're heading. I don't mean to sound like
no,
I am being cynical about it, but that's where we're heading. Like, humanity needs to really take a step back and start evaluating, because we're talking about education. I mean, we're for some reason in discussion of how we educate children matters the most. Here in America, elsewhere in Africa, where you're at, it's where the mindset begins to formulate, where it begins to grow. And if the system didn't allow it to grow in the healthiest manner, and we all know our children are being raised to be the best consumers ever, which parent is going to say to a child and saying, go away, I'm not going to buy this? I mean, the competition, you talk about competition. Parents then were engaged in competition and say, hey, my child did this more, or my child came up with more money. We structured or we trained the mindset to do that. What's in it for me, good or bad, reward or punishment. And it begins from at that age. We really have a whole lot to be concerned about. And I think we're trying to bring that to the surface. We're trying to bring that to where we're talking about in being conscious and being deliberate and intentful to make that change. So I think it's a good discussion, and I think it's one that needs to be had. And I'm hoping a lot of people will read this piece and then kind of take it to heart, digest it, and not just read it and set it aside. I think we all need to take a minute and start evaluating how much of a consumer we have become and what are we consuming.
You know, and I suppose just to be honest with oneself.
Yes.
You know, so that we can be honest about our decisions. There's something in Eastern philosophy, they talk about honesty of mind. Mm-hmm. And it's a very subtle thing. And, you know, most people don't lie, you know, but lots of people are deceitful with themselves. There's a lot of self-deceit and why we do things. You know, what is it that I'm driven by? You know, is it really ambition? You know, do I want to be seen to be X, Y, Z? Is that what? And if we could just, and there's a great Indian philosopher called Krishnamurti who talked about choiceless awareness, so that you'd be choicelessly aware of your motives, and not. So there's no judgment, there's no right or wrong. You simply see it, but once, and then having seen it, then you act or you don't act. Change comes about through awareness. Mm-hmm. If I'm living a dishonest life, a dishonest, self-centered life, and I'm not aware of it, I'll never change. But if I become aware of that,
right.
And a lot of the time that awareness is resisted because, you know, it's tarnished with judgment and criticism and so on. So if we just become, I'm selfish. You know, I become aware of that. And then through that awareness, there can be change. Just simply being aware of it. And in that awareness, you see, okay, there's another way of living. You know, there's a kinder, softer, gentler way of living. And, you know, I'm going to start to live like that now.
So to wrap this up, I'm going to link this into this video so people can actually read the rest of the article, the piece. If you were to really want people to zoom in and walk away with, what message is this piece? I know there's a lot in it, but what would be the things that you would want people to walk away with from this article?
I suppose the most important thing is that we are responsible for the society in which we live. It's not somebody else's responsibility. It's mine, it's yours, it's ours. And if we want there to be change, we have to bring it about. So that's the first thing. And secondly, to say that the divisions, the pain, the anguish, the violence, the poverty that exists, it exists because of us. Yes, the systems are completely broken, and yes, we need radical systemic change. And I'm hopefully that will come, but it won't come unless we demand it, unless we make sure it comes, and we have to offer alternatives. So yes, there needs to be systemic change, but I have to change. And that's the key thing, not to put responsibility onto other people. It's our world, we are that world, and we are responsible for it. And if we're going to save it, we have to be the ones to do it. You can't wait. If you wait for a government or politicians or corporate bodies, you'll wait forever. It just will not happen, because it's not in their interests to change it. We individually have to change. We are responsible for the society and the world in which we live. And the number one thing we need to learn to do is to share. Share your time. It's easy to share money. It's easy to donate $10 or $50 or whatever it is. Fine, and that's helpful. But, share your time, share your knowledge, your experience, your understanding, your problems, your worries. Get involved. Find an area of social need that you care about and get engaged. Make a contribution. It's up to us.
Wow, I think that's an amazing way of wrapping this up. Hopefully we'll continue having conversations and discussions like this. Thank you so much, Graham, again, for your time. You're obviously prodding us to think towards self first before we reflect out. Hopefully our listeners will do just that and reflect back and maybe even add within their own comments and within their own understanding how they're taking steps towards making that personal change. So thank you so much for your time.
That's a pleasure, Mami. Nice to talk to you.
Absolutely. Thank you. The change that we want to see begins from us, and hopefully the discussion will help us get there. And this is Mami, and this is Independent Voice. Thank you.